Chapter 2, Section 4, Mediterranean Civilizations. These will obviously be civilizations that are around the Mediterranean Sea. Here is the Mediterranean. Let's see. So most of our study will be focused on the civilizations in this area of the Mediterranean, although we will be getting later in the year to Greece, the Roman Empire, and Egypt. Greece, Roman, and Egypt. Okay, but for our purposes in Chapter 2, Section 4, we will be studying this area. Just as people can chart the history of civilization on a timeline, you can also chart your own personal history. What are some of the major events in the history of your family? This is an example of a timeline for Jared's family. And what year did your family move to the home where you live now? Make a timeline that shows your major events in your family history. You don't actually have to do that, but please just take a look at Jared's lifeline or timeline of his life here. You can see his family had a reunion. Jared was born. It was his first birthday. He went to the zoo for the first time. He went to Disney World for the first time. His brother broke his leg, and then he began kindergarten, so on and so forth. You can do the same thing with your life. So take a minute and think about what are some of the major events in your lifetime that would be on your timeline. Questions to think about as we explore this section. Number 1. How did the Phoenicians help spread civilization throughout the Mediterranean area? 2. What were the major events in the history of the Israelites? Key terms that will be defined for you in your notes through the Google Classroom: alphabet, monotheism, famine, exile. Key people and places you will also find in your notes through the Google Classroom: Moses, Phoenicia, Canaan, Jerusalem, Israel, and Judah. We will also hear those terms, people, and places through the video and through the textbook. As you watch this video, please have your notes open through the Google Classroom to fill in and submit as homework. While the great empire of Hammurabi was rising and falling, the people of a poor city on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea were getting rich by gathering snails. Once again, here is the Mediterranean. Let's see. The snails that washed up on the shores of the city of Tyre were not ordinary snails. These snails produced a rich purple dye. This dye was highly valued by wealthy people throughout the Mediterranean region. Ships from Tyre sold the dye at extremely high prices. The profits soon made Tyre a wealthy and active city. The Phoenicians, sailors of the Mediterranean. Tyre was a major city in a region called Phoenicia, shown on this map. If you locate it. The Phoenicians' outlook was not eastward towards Mesopotamia. Rather, the Phoenicians looked westward towards the Mediterranean Sea and the cities that were growing up around it. The Phoenicians had settled in a land that had few but important resources. Besides the snails, there were dense forests of cedar trees. Phoenicians sold these resources to neighboring peoples. As trade grew, the Phoenicians looked to the sea to increase their profits. In time, they became the world's first trading empire. From about 1100 BC to 800 BC, Phoenicia was a great sea power. Phoenician ships sailed all over the Mediterranean Sea. They even sailed out into the stormy Atlantic Ocean. They came back from these trips with stories of horrible monsters who lived in the ocean depths. Did the Phoenicians really believe these stories? Nobody knows for sure, but the stories did help keep other people from trying to compete for trade in the Atlantic. Trade brought rich goods from lands around the Mediterranean Sea to the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon. Bazaars swelled with foods brought from faraway places. These foods included figs, olives, honey, and spices. In the bazaars, merchants sold strange animals such as giraffes and warthogs from Africa and bears from Europe. Travelers throughout the Mediterranean area were awed by the grand ships and overflowing markets of Tyre. This little poem was once written by an ancient traveler who visited Tyre's bazaars.
When your wares came from the sea, you satisfied many peoples. With your great wealth and merchandise, you enriched the kings of the earth.
The Phoenician alphabet, one sound, one letter. Because they had so much trade, the Phoenicians needed to simplify writing. Cuneiform, with its hundreds of symbols, was just too complicated. The Phoenicians found a way to write using just 22 symbols. This was the Phoenician alphabet, a set of symbols that represented the sounds of language. It forms the basis of the alphabet that people in the United States and many other countries use today. Each of the 22 letters in the Phoenician alphabet stood for one consonant sound. The simple Phoenician alphabet was far easier to learn than cuneiform. Before the alphabet, highly educated scribes controlled the power of writing. With the alphabet, many more people could learn. The rise of the Israelites. South of Phoenicia, a small band of people settled along the shores of the Mediterranean. They were called the Israelites. Although the Israelites never built a large empire, they made a deep impact on our civilization. The Israelites traced their beginnings to Mesopotamia. For hundreds of years, they lived as shepherds and merchants who grazed their flocks outside Sumerian cities. According to the Bible, a leader named Abraham led his people to a belief in one God. This practice is called monotheism. Mono is the Greek word for one. Theism, as you know, refers to gods. The Bible explains that God promised Abraham that his people would have their own land if they would follow his word.
Get out of your country and from your kindred, relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation.
The Bible goes on to explain how, around 1900 BC, Abraham led the Israelites from Mesopotamia to a new home in Canaan. Find Canaan here on the map. Around 1800 BC, a famine spread across Canaan. A famine is a time where there is so little food that many people starve. The famine caused the Israelites to flee south to Egypt. In Egypt, the Israelites lived well for about 600 years. Many of them reached high positions in the government. Later, they were enslaved when an Egyptian king grew jealous of their wealth and suspicious of their power. Return to Canaan. The Bible tells how an Israelite hero named Moses led his enslaved people out of Egypt. For the next 40 years, the Israelites wandered through the desert of the Sinai Peninsula. Sinai is here on the map. The Bible says that while in the desert, God gave the Israelites 10 commandments, a code of laws. At last, the Israelites returned to Canaan. There, over time, the Israelites moved from herding to farming and built their own cities. Conquest of Canaan. As they moved further north into Canaan, the Israelites faced opposition. Slowly, through fierce wars, the Israelites conquered all of Canaan. 2 kings led them to victory. Saul, pictured here, considered the first king of the Israelites, defended them against many enemies. The next king, David, pictured here, united the 12 Israelite tribes into a single nation. David established his capital at the city of Jerusalem. After David died, his son, Solomon, inherited the kingdom. Under Solomon's rule, Israel grew prosperous through trade. The Israelites sold palm and olive oils, honey, fruit, vegetables, and grain to neighboring peoples. King Solomon also developed a sea trade with neighboring lands. On the very first voyage, an Israelite ship brought back more than 13 tons of gold. Solomon transformed the city of Jerusalem into a magnificent capital. His most prized monument was a beautiful temple in the center of Jerusalem. It became the central place of worship for the Israelites. Solomon's building projects were very expensive, however. The country faced hard times, and after his death, it split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was called Israel. The southern kingdom took the name Judah. The divided kingdom was ripe for invasion, and its dangerous neighbor, Assyria, was gaining power. In 722 BC, the Assyrians seized the kingdom of Israel. They punished the Israelites by exiling thousands to distant parts of their empire. To exile people means to force them to live in another country. About 135 years later, the kingdom of Judah fell to the Chaldeans. The Judeans were exiled as well. 3 questions to make sure you can understand and answer after watching this video. 1. What impact did the Phoenicians have on the Mediterranean world? 2. Explain the importance of Phoenician writing. 3. Briefly trace the history of the Israelites from the leadership of Abraham to King Solomon. Make sure your homework has been completed after you have watched this video, submitted through the Google Classroom, and we'll see you in class tomorrow.